And we're live. How you doing, everybody? We are back with a new HAMAA Live to celebrate the victory at Adwa, Adwa Victory Day. Today with me, well, we have me, Mansa, the Chief Operations Officer of the HAMAA Association. We have the HAMAA Association's President, Osazua Mkante, and we have HAMAA's Vice President, Samuel Godwin. Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello. How you doing, folks?
Hey, folks, how's it going?
So we are here to discuss the victory at Adwa. So, for people who are not familiar with these events, we are actually going to talk a little bit about the background of what led up to the Battle of Adwa. We're also going to talk about some of the key things to consider, some of the causes, how the wars went, what the warriors were carrying, and also what followed from this conflict. So, let's get into it. The year is 1885. We're going to start here. Now, we are looking at a 4-month conference that took place in Berlin because we can't talk about the Battle of Adwa without talking about the Berlin Conference. And for the uninitiated, the Berlin Conference was essentially a meeting that the great powers of the world, European powers, had in the late 1800s after having expanded their colonies as far as they could into the Americas and into Asia. Having lost many of their colonies due to revolutions across the Caribbean and in South America, the European powers were looking for new places to expand. And the one place they hadn't conquered yet fully was the continent of Africa. Now, one of the challenges that the European powers had through the period of colonization was that they ended up bumping heads regularly and ending up fighting very costly wars that cost them more in land, in treasure, in lives, and they wanted to focus all of their energy on being able to take the land and the resources of the people they were trying to conquer and not fight each other. So instead, what they chose to do was they chose to sit down and carve the continent up. And they all determined what places they were going to go after, giving people different regions and sections, and agreeing to not fight over pieces of land that other powers had taken. So this is where Ethiopia comes up in the conversation, because Ethiopia itself, as a country, as an empire, already had longstanding relationships with various European powers. They'd allied with the Portuguese, they were allies with the British, there were the wars that they fought with the Portuguese against the Somali-Ottoman alliance, a lot of stuff happening. But at the end of it, it was still an African country that Europeans felt needed to be exploited. And so, after all of the wrangling that they had, the ultimate decision was to give Italy access to Ethiopia. And so this is where this all begins. And to set the stage, we're looking at Ethiopia in the late 19th century. It was still largely a feudalist system, not too different from what was being done in Europe during the Middle Ages. You had the emperor or the king of kings, you had the various lords, the lords had all their private armies, and it was a very Game of Thrones type situation where the lords would fight each other and fight the emperor, and there would be a little bit of disharmony and disunity. But Menelik II saw what was happening in the rest of the continent and decided that he needed to unify his country faster. And so this resulted in a treaty with the Italians to get more weapons and firearms and tools to be able to establish control over their land. And this is where we get the Treaty of Wuchale. Sam, can you tell us a bit about the Treaty of Wuchale?
Yeah, so the Treaty of Wuchale was a treaty that was established between King Umberto I of Italy and Menelik, King of Kings of Ethiopia. And the whole point of the treaty was to establish an alliance, or at least at the beginning. At least that was the pretense of what it was supposed to be. It was a treaty in which, like Mansa said, in order to just get weapons shipped over to Menelik and his supporters, to establish trade relations, the classic stuff that you would see when it comes down to allegiances. Now, this is where the pretense to the Italo-Ethiopian War began. There was a particular article within that treaty, Article 17, which was supposed to be like a summary of like the kind of relationship that Ethiopia was supposed to have with Italy. And essentially what was supposed to be more of an alliance from at least what Manelik thought on his side, ended up being a sly way of introducing a protectorate status for the Italian Empire. There is, I guess, controversy that you could say that like there was a misinterpretation or a mistranslation that happened between how it was written in Amharic versus how it was written in Italy. Some in Italian, some people say that like the person who was translating the form actually purposefully did that in order to push Italian influence onto the relationship that they would like to see between between Ethiopia and the Italian crown. But essentially, the damage was done. Manelik caught on to this 2 years later and realized that yes, this is a asymmetrical agreement, and did not want anything to do with this. Now I'm a little bit fuzzy on like the outcomes afterwards. Could you explain that, Mansa?
Sure. So essentially, what ended up happening is, so we're talking about Article 17. Article 17 of the treaty has two different wordings. In Amharic, the treaty said in Article 17 that if Ethiopia wanted to engage in international trade, that they may make use of the Italian government or Italy's representatives in order to make those deals. On the Italian translation, that was also signed by Menelik, it said that they must use the Italian government as a proxy for any international trade deals. So that was what they used to invoke protectorate status, because this treaty was being used to isolate them economically so that they wouldn't be able to build relationships. So any country that decided that they wanted to trade with them, other European powers, for example, wouldn't be able to because of the treaty that they have, and they would honor that treaty over any desires of the Ethiopians. One of the other things that ended up happening is in 1895, there was an uprising in Eritrea against the Italians. And some of the suspicions were that the uprising was financed by the Ethiopians, having discovered what was in the treaty. So that in itself was part of everything that sort of built up. We look at these conflicts like one day we snap and it just happened, but as you can see with many world events, these things take years, months, weeks to bubble up before they explode into violence. So in this case, we're looking at a treaty that happened in 1889, the emperor discovering the issue in the early 1890s, funding a rebellion in a land that they basically gave to the Italians as part of a treaty that was now invalid. In 1895, and then in 1896, the Italians then raise an army of 20,000 people and invade.
Yep.
But that brings us, of course, to the battle itself. Also, what can you tell us about the Battle of Adwa and what the warriors themselves did and how they conducted themselves and what they carried?
The thing that stands out most to me is it was really a confederation of different peoples that came together. Like you said, Menelik, he signed that treaty in order to get arms, in order to bring his subjects together. So he need, it was like a kind of a civil war thing going on. So he needed arms in order to put down the civil war and unite his people. But once they were united, it was a lot easier to mobilize them. The one thing, again, these were not necessarily full-time soldiers. These were the people that were mobilized, but the different ethnic groups pride themselves on their males being warriors. So they had their own training. They would easily put down the farming tools and pick up a sword, put down the farming tools, pick up the rifle, and go to war. So, he didn't necessarily have a large standing army, but I can't think of the word, but basically it was called, I think it's translated to a drum call. Once the drum call was made, it would be passed on and the folks would, mobilize within a day or two, and it would come together. It was said that when the Ethiopian army was in transit, it looked more like a migration than an actual army moving, because warriors brought their families with them. They brought their kids. They brought their wives. It was noted that one of the reasons that the Italians during the combat suffered losses due to dehydration. They couldn't get water, but it was noted that the women and children were crawling up the front lines, bringing their men, their fathers, water as the combat went on. Another thing that was said about them was the supply line. So food. So Italy had to bring their own food and water with them, whereas the Ethiopians, due to the land being so lush, they scavenged and foraged as they went along. So it was better for them to move about. If they stayed in one place for too long, it would tap the resources of that area and make it harder for them. But at some point, Menelik did order food stores, food depots to be left at certain places, knowing that the bulk of the army would be going this way. So he ordered food to be left at different spots. Again, this was not necessarily a conscripted army. It was folks came with their own possessions. A lot of them wore just the sash. I'm not sure of the name, but just the linen or cloth wrapping tied around them is what they wore every day, barefoot or sandals, as they went into war. Rifles were definitely were prized possessions, for not only for combat but for hunting as well. So in general, Ethiopian men really wanted to have a rifle just as a tool for survival outside of combat. So there were many different rifles, which again is something that I loved as well. Menelik did, in the attempt to get the Civil War, he attained many different rifles. He actually obtained rifles from Italy before they went into combat. He attained some Russian rifles. He attained British rifles. So there were so many different rifles. One of the things that I also liked was there were a lot of rifle modifications on hand. So some older weapons were musket, barrel loading weapons were actually modified and transformed into breech loading weapons as well. One thing that was noted, there a lot of the weapons that they received, the rifles were shortened by about maybe 6 or 7 inches for cavalry use. So there's a large, so I actually was looking for I found a site that has some conflict era rifles left over. And a lot of them, they call them the Gras modified cavalry weapons. And they were they were cut this much off of the barrel, I guess to make it easier for them on horseback as they were going. But then if a warrior did not have a rifle, they went to battle with, swords, knives, shields, and spears. Every warrior had a spear, but they also had knives. They had the gile. This weapon can be found all over the Horn of Africa. The Afar people are definitely noted for using this dagger, long dagger, short sword. Then you have the chattel. I don't know if I can get it on a frame here. Can you switch the frame for me, Mansa?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so this is the chattel, chattel sword. Now this is a sparring weapon, so it's not a live weapon. But the cutting edge was on both sides. Note notably the inside of the weapon. This drastic curve was because the shields themselves had a pronounced ridge here, and in order to get around the shield, the curve of the chattel would grew the larger the cone on your shield grew, the larger the sweep on the chattel grew as well. So definitely, they would charge in the battle with swords, spears. There was accounts of the Askari, who were the native, I believe, Eritrean warriors who fought for the Italians. They were trained with muskets, with bayonets. So not muskets, I'm sorry, rifles with bayonets. So there was a lot of heavy, bayonet fighting. And they said on two specific times during the Battle of Adwa that the Ethiopians were repelled by bayonets. But they had cannon, they had artillery as well. The standard Ethiopian weaponry. We had the Ethiopians had it as well.
Yeah, and as I understand it, the Italians themselves, assuming that Ethiopia was going to fall like all the other countries or kingdoms that have been taken over in Africa, I think they brought something about like 20,000 Askaris alongside the main Italian force. And the Ethiopians fielded something about 145,000 soldiers.
Yep.
And they had, I'm going to do a ballpark number here, about 28,000 rifles that were breech loaders. And they had something to the effect of like 57,000 horsemen.
Yeah.
So the Ethiopians were not taking this lightly.
No, they came prepared. After years of squabbling amongst themselves, it's like you fight your brother and your cousin for so long. When your neighbor come knocking on the door, you ready for action. Who this guy? Who he think he is? And coming to my house telling me, y'all ready? And they came together and they did work.
And what's interesting about this is the battle itself only lasted a few hours.
Yeah.
There were some slight skirmishing as the Italians were traveling through some of the hinterlands, and then when they finally, because people were hiding in the mountains, taking pot shots at them, and then the battle itself only lasted 2 hours.
Yeah, I believe it was only a few hours. Once they got into to the highlands, the Ethiopians had the high ground, and it was just the punch. They came right in. They had the high ground. They used rocks and logs, boulders and logs, as well as arms and armor against these folks. And it was definitely I think I read it was more like 4 to 5 hours. But it was the Battle of Adwa was a short battle before the Italians retreated and actually the Ethiopians were able to capture all of their big guns. They captured every single one of them.
Yeah, and it was I think a couple of the Italians ended up being held as ransom, and I think a couple because slavery was still practiced in Ethiopia at this time. A couple. From what I understand, ended up being sold into slavery locally. Later on, getting liberated by the Italians through negotiations.
Yeah.
But I think that came.
I read that the many of the Askari had their right hand and left foot cut off. Several were castrated. I don't know if they were sent home, but I think it would have been easier just cut his hand off and send them home. If you make it, you make it. Let your people worry about you. Because and then the Italians were definitely captured, and they said they received fair treatment, but many did die in their confinement before they were before Italy sued for peace and they were able to do an exchange.
Absolutely. So what can you tell us about some of the tactics that they used on the field? Did they go cavalry first? Did they focus on using the new technology with the Maxim guns that they acquired? Uh, how did the Ethiopians approach the battle itself?
Well, the main thing that they like to do is what they call the half moon formation, which would be familiar to Shaka's bullhorn formation. They like to envelop their army on the sides, and have a strong front, but and envelop them on the sides as well. Um, I believe from how I understood it, there were a lot of skirmish type tactics. Lot of hit and hit and then pull back, hit and pull back. Just wearing on the Italians. The Ethiopians suffered heavy losses. They definitely suffer more losses than the Italians, but they had the larger force. The firepower was, every Italian had a good rifle, but let's say only 55% of the Ethiopians had a good rifle, 25 had an okay rifle, and another 25 that had, was with a sword and shield. So, but the cavalry was, you have to think that they couldn't be used in the mountain area, too hard, too effectively. But they were definitely used when the rout came, and routing the enemy. They would definitely come in and help clean up and rout during the when the Italians were trying to retreat. But a lot of what I read, I saw half moon formation several times. So whatever vantage point that the Italians have, they were dug in. They tried to sweep around and envelop them on the sides. So they'd be basically fighting on three different fronts at the same time.
So one of the encyclopedias that we referenced while we were researching it. Look at me, I can talk today. While we were researching it, indicates that the Italian forces suffered about 11,000 dead before they basically were routed, and the Ethiopians about 17,000. So I mean, they definitely did suffer more casualties, but I think also that probably had to do with fewer people using firearms, more people relying on melee weapons. But you could also argue that the Ethiopians had like one breech loading rifle for every soldier that came across the border.
Yeah.
But training and bayonet charges definitely play a part in that, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Same thing. It's funny. I made the comparison to Shaka's bullhorn formations. One of the the battles, I can't pronounce it. The one where the British took the big defeat in South Africa. A lot of the firsthand accounts from the Zulus talked about how formidable the bayonet was. The Zulus themselves said that even with their equals and their shields, they could not get past those British bayonets, and they would cut them down to the point where they stopped trying to directly engage them in hand to hand, and they would throw their spears at 10 yards, at 5 yards. They would throw the spears first, wound them before they were able to rush and get in. So proper bayonet training is definitely a bad thing, man. So I could definitely see how the Oscaris were able to repel. Once they relied on their training, I think they said at least 2 or 3 times they were able to repel the Ethiopians with the bayonet tactics before they were just overwhelmed themselves.
I would imagine that a bayonet is basically just a really heavy short spear with a club on the end of it, right? But then also, if you have, I guess, a round in the chamber, that short spear with a club on the end of it can also get somebody pretty devastatingly when you get up close, right?
Yeah,
it's expedited pike and shot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, right, the bayonet is such a versatile weapon. I mean, you could obviously use it at range. You could, use it in closer quarters. I mean, it's still used as a weapon today. I think
Yeah,
there
yeah,
were in Afghanistan there were some Gurkhas who got awarded for the use of for having to defend themselves against the Taliban using the bayonet in the field. So that was definitely a very powerful weapon to use.
yeah,
And then, of course, if the blade breaks, you can always just use the rifle as a club because the
yeah.
rifles back then were so heavy.
Yeah.
Definitely solid.
Definitely pretty solid.
I mean, it's a mini
But,
cannon. That's what especially
Yeah,
the way
basically.
it was a cannon.
Yeah, hand cannon.
it is a hand cannon. I
Yeah,
mean, I would argue that sort of that was the pinnacle of warfare at that time for the infantry soldier, right?
yeah,
I mean, the spear is the king of the battlefield. So if you want your gun to be more deadly, then just make your gun into a spear. Now you've got a spear gun,
yeah,
gun spear, I guess,
Yeah.
because spear gun shoots spears. But so let's talk a little bit about what happened after the battle, right? So after the Italians were defeated, um, the Ethiopians now were able to negotiate a new treaty. So they nullified a previous treaty, the Treaty of Wuchale, which was another treaty that followed the. Oh no, well, the Treaty of Wuchale is the Treaty of Wuchale, but that treaty got nullified at the end of the battle, and the Ethiopians took, I believe, about 3,000 captives in that battle. And so the Italians, obviously wanting their soldiers back, are going to make agreements. And so what followed for that is the new Treaty of Addis Ababa, which happened in, I think, a little bit later. I don't remember the specific year, but that basically solidified them as an existing equal country in the world stage, which meant now that Ethiopia at that time could start entering into treaty negotiations, trade negotiations, and basically function as an equal partner
yeah,
in the rest of the world, and maintain their full independence and autonomy. So a lot of European nations did end up establishing ties. Britain had a very close alliance with Ethiopia up until the end of World War II. If we all remember, when the Italians invaded the second time, um, obviously Europe was a bit, or its European allies were more concerned with the trouble happening on their borders.
yeah,
But when they started making headway against the Italians and the Germans in World War II, in 1941, Britain sent a force to support the Ethiopian resistance movement and ultimately overthrew the Italians as part of those agreements. Uh, and I believe they up until the end of the Ethiopian monarchy, they maintained pretty close ties. I know that the Queen of England, or the former
yeah,
Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, did visit Ethiopia fairly often. The famous
yeah,
picture of her and Prince Philip bowing, of course, in front of Emperor Haile Selassie after World War II. That's also very interesting.
yeah.
But the battle itself was interesting, and they had some pretty big heroes in the course of that. You know who I'm going to mention?
Yes, I know.
You know who I'm going to talk about? Our boy Ras Mulugeta. So Ras Mulugeta, for those of you who are uninitiated, was a hero of the Battle of Adwa. He was a warrior who, was noted for his bravery during the battle. He led his own personal army to go and fight, and he actually shows up again in World War II. So when the Italians are prepping to invade Ethiopia, there's this famous video taken by British Pathé of Ras Mulugeta walking up the stairs to the emperor when all of the lords of Ethiopia were bowing to the emperor. He's got his full regalia on, and he was an old man at this time.
Yeah.
He was, I believe, in his mid to late 70s. He showed up in Addis Ababa before the emperor with his personal army of 80,000 men. So he had 80,000 men at his beck and call to go to war. Shows up in Ethiopia with this army, or shows up in Addis Ababa with this army, goes to the king of Ethiopia, goes to Emperor Haile Selassie and says, I have been killing Italians since before you were born, and I'm ready to do it again. And he leads his army at his advanced age in several engagements against the Italians. And in World War II, going out the way he lived, his unit was being strafed by Italian planes and by Italian tanks. They were being pursued, and because his army was mostly infantry and cavalry, they didn't really have the equipment to fight planes and tanks. So while his army retreated, after both of his sons ended up passing away in that fight, he pulls his sword. I love recounting this. His men are running away. Planes are strafing, cannons firing, tanks firing. He turns his horse around, draws his sword, and charges at the Italian line. And that is the end of Ras Mulugeta, charging into battle against tanks and planes on his horse with his sword drawn in order to cover for his men as they escaped. Um, Definitely one of the great figures who lived large during the Battle of Adwa, but ended up leaving this world just as large, fighting the way
on his own terms.
On his own
on
terms.
his own terms. Retirement, what?
Yeah, yeah.
We should make memes of him. Like,
Yeah, that was. I mean, you could tell from his body language when he was, when he's on that when he's on those steps, man, and like, he's shaking the sword and he's just like just looking at the emperor like you could tell that was a man of substance. Just, I didn't speak the language. It's not. I don't even know if that actual clip is has audio, but But just the body language and the fire alone from that man, that was. I'm sure that was something to behold.
He had that dog in him. Well, he had
Yes,
all
he
the
did.
dogs in him.
Yeah, yes.
But
Yes.
so like in terms of the meaning of the Battle of Adwa, like what can we learn from this event? We look at a country that has this long storied history. They had a history of building relationships with European powers, and then one day a European power decides that they need to be colonized, they need to be conquered. Um, they're one of two nations in Africa that somehow managed to not be colonized during this entire scramble, when nations were set up against each other and all of these things. And not only were they deceived, they caught the deception, fought against the deception, threw the treaty away, fought a war, won that war handily, and then maintained their independence and got themselves a position on the world stage, at least until World War II. So when we're looking at that, what can we learn from this piece of history? What does this teach us about history? What does this teach us about what it means for the study of African history, the way we look at it, and even just from a Pan-Africanist standpoint, how we approach understanding the world in this perspective?
well, I could say that it's easy for the Pan Africanist perspective. Like, this was an African nation that was able to resist a European nation against all odds and actually win. It's funny because, like, in the in the interview that I had watched of the man who wrote about the book about the Battle of Adwa, he mentions like how like there are two, like obviously the two classic African sovereignties that resisted colonial rule, the Zulus and the Abyssinians. And it's like the Zulus were able to win the battle, but Ethiopia was able to definitively win the war. So like Ethiopia was able to definitively put a hard stop on colonial spread, and it resonates with a lot of like people in the continent as well as across the diaspora, because Ethiopia shows that like this is a more of like a resistant narrative to what is always peddled by like a Eurocentric white supremacist type of rhetoric, of how like African nations can be overwhelmed or overcome by a European influence. But there is like there's this one country, this one nation that really stood as a solid foundation against it.
One of the things that I noticed was how before the war, how Ethiopians were portrayed in media. They were a caricature of all of the most racist trope for Black Africans. But after the war, to justify their defeat, the Italians actually changed the classifications of Ethiopians from Negro to Semitic. So we weren't, we weren't beat by Negroes. We were actually beat by dark-skinned white people. And unfortunately, that did have an effect on some Ethiopians because they kind of said the same thing. We're not Negro, we're not Black. No, we are Semitic people. And I guess that kind of speaks to, some things today, where some Ethiopians don't consider themselves Black. It's funny, Black is an American, it's a worldwide thing, but it's big here, in America. We know we Black, but a lot of Africans don't, especially on the Horn, consider themselves Black. They don't learn that they're Black until they come to America, which is, I've seen that through several different, countries in Africa, that they don't realize they don't learn that they're Black until they come to America and they are classified. You're Black, told by white people, by other Black people. But the fact that Ethiopia had to justify their loss by saying, "Oh no, they're not Negro, they're just dark skinned white people." I think it's just, it's the base of colonialism. That's the blood of colonialism right there. Like in order to subjugate, people, you have to dehumanize them, and so you have to make them other to a large degree. And the fact that, oh, you know what, that's why we couldn't beat the Ethiopians, because they're not really other. They're just like us, just dark skinned. That's all.
What I think is interesting, in terms of when I look at the Battle of Adwa and what it could mean for us, as people, especially people who like history, even if you're interested in politics or not, is the idea that Emperor Menelik, in my view, saw the writing on the wall, and he understood that unity was the key to survival.
Yeah.
Most people, when they think about Ethiopia, they tend to think about only one group of people, the Habeshas. But Ethiopia has so many different groups of people. You've got Oromos, ethnic Somalis, you have Tigray people, you have just so many different groups of people. And the emperor being able to unify all of them long enough so that every single group of these people are now involved in the collective defense of their empire, of their home, whether you were a peasant or whether you were a noble. Colonization was going to be bad news for you. So they all got together, whatever their feelings were about the emperor, whatever their feelings were about competing lordships, whatever their feelings were about the other ethnic groups, they had to protect the land. And I think that when people in general, even if you aren't African, when you understand that when we come together, despite our differences, for the collective good, that we'll be able to win a victory, we'll be able to achieve things that maybe others didn't think was possible. We have an interesting question here from the chat. The question was, wasn't it under heavy Russian Orthodox Christian influence? Was it really independent? So would you guys like me to handle this one?
Yeah.
I think you're best equipped for that one.
So if we're talking about religion in Ethiopia, we have to remember that Ethiopia, the Empire of Abyssinia, historically the Empire of Aksum, is one of the first nations in the world to declare itself Christian, which may in part be some of the reason why they had a much easier time building relationships with some European powers, because already being a Christian kingdom or a Christian ruled kingdom, because there were other religions in the kingdom as well, that operated on a system that was similar to a European feudalist system, there was a bit more, it was a bit easier to build that connection. Part of what had a good, or what led to a good relationship between countries like Ethiopia and England, or Ethiopia and the Russian Empire while the czars were still in charge, was Christianity. Both the Empire of Ethiopia and Britain has Saint George as their patron saint, which is something that brought a connection between the two of them. The fact that the Ethiopians had their own brand of orthodoxy going all the way back to the mid 4th century, and the Russians also had their own brand of orthodoxy going all the way back through their connections to the Byzantine Empire, speaks to a relationship that they share. In fact, religiously, as Orthodox Christians, they would have been in communion with each other for the longest time. So it's not necessarily that the Russian Orthodox Church ruled Ethiopia, because Ethiopia itself was already Orthodox Christian. You could argue that the Ethiopian Church was subservient to the Egyptian or the Coptic Orthodox Church, because up until the 20th century, that was considered a singular church. But they were definitely independent. They weren't ruled by the Russian Orthodox Church. It's just because they were both Orthodox Christian kingdoms, they shared that in common, which helped lead to a better relationship. And oftentimes, if you take a look at Russian history in Africa, Russians had a tendency historically to prop up African kingdoms, especially if they were Orthodox Christian, largely because they wanted to thumb their nose at Western Europe, but also because their view was that a kingdom that shared a religion with them would be a stronger alliance for them to have. But yeah, that would be the answer to that. So, I think that the Battle of Adwa itself is just such an interesting topic to study, because I don't think it gets covered enough, at least when we talk about the history of Africa, when we look at colonization and the expansion and how people survived through it, and what the cost of that was. Because really, at the cost of Ethiopia's, first of all, unity, they lost control of the entire coast leading to the Red Sea, right? Eritrea,
Yeah.
of course, got colonized by Italy, which was a price that the Ethiopian Empire paid. The Ethiopian Empire paid with the ability to trade through sea or through the sea. And obviously, there was the history of colonization that went with that. There's the 17,000 Ethiopians that died as a result of it. There was the violence that ended up having to happen in order to unify the empire in the first place. Because I guarantee you, at least in my view, that if Menelik had not been able to unify the empire of Ethiopia and put an end to the internal conflict, there's no way they would have survived being invaded by one of the European powers. Because as they've done with other kingdoms, one by one, they will sort of
divide and conquer. It would have been a divide and conquer.
Exactly.
For sure.
Which is unfortunately a story that has been commonly shared across the continent during this time.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely. And I mean, there were a lot of countries that tried to catch up, right? We look at Madagascar as a perfect example. I like to bring up the story of Queen Ranavalona I and how she captured a French cannon maker to force him to teach her.
She persuaded a French.
At gunpoint, after she made him make a few.
Yeah.
Right? So, she gets him to do that. And, they were able to resist French colonization until the firearm technology developed and they were not on that train.
Yeah.
I think that access to modern firearms made it much easier for the Ethiopians to defend themselves. Because when we look at the asymmetry in technology, when Ethiopia was invaded by Italy in the 1930s, it was a completely different story, right? The main imperial army collapsed and became pockets of resistance movements and sort of a guerrilla war up until 1941. And I would argue that had Ethiopia been given the time to get caught up like Emperor Haile Selassie had intended, perhaps that invasion would have turned out differently.
Yeah.
But definitely access to modern firearms and using tried and tested battle tactics really helped. And I mean, having 145,000 people on the field isn't too shabby either.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It was definitely the mobilization of the people was a huge factor. And it was like what they say in German, one mind, one sound. So you heard that drum, and you knew what it was. Okay, I have two. You heard the drum today. You know that tomorrow morning, or maybe in 2 days, that's it. Everybody gather here, go back, get your stuff. You got to give people time to head to the mountains and let them know. But then everybody's going to come back here, and we're out. And I think having just the warrior mindset of all of those different folks, it was, you hear it, let's go. You're used to defending your homestead from another people. Now it's like, okay, these the people I defended myself from, a year ago. So I know that these guys throw down, So if the two of us are together and we're going against these folks, it's I can only imagine, the different languages on the battlefield, the different armament, the different styles. But it's like you look over there and it's like, are those the Afar? Oh man, they about to give it to them. So it's like, so now it's also a competition. Yo, we can't let them go. All right, y'all ready? Let's go on the road. Come on. And you bring it, like you said, just bringing the differences of the people together and mobilizing that was a heck of a thing.
And that's the thing. It is one heck of a thing, because it's just like, how were you able to get people who were warring with each other not too long ago to unite for this, for another guy who claims that he is like the supreme ruler of all of Abyssinia, just like the other guy over there. It's like, okay, look at this, get a load of this guy. How do you mobilize? How do you gather everybody? And then on top of that too, make sure that they don't kill each other is another thing.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the wild part of it too. I mean, I try to imagine or get inside the head of a common soldier in that period, right? Because when you think about it, right, like you said, not too long ago, and when we're talking not too long ago, these guys probably were shooting at each other, 5 or 6 years prior.
Yeah, 4 years ago. Yeah,
4 years prior, they were shooting at each other, and now all of a sudden, right, they've all unified. Even less than 2 years, maybe even a year prior, however long it took for the emperor to put to rest all of the civil conflict. And then now they're looking at each other, and it's almost like Legolas and Gimli on the wall, right? Who thought I'd be dying next to Normal? Well, how about a friend? Like, it's they're together, and I think getting swept up in that motion of, we are all from this land, we are all here to defend ourselves against this alien force that is coming in to take our homes and take our land and do whatever they did to the other places around us. And I would argue that some of the exploitations that the Italians were doing in Italian Somaliland and in Eritrea were probably a warning sign for them, right? Better the devil you know than the one you don't. This isn't to say that, of course, the ruling class in Ethiopia was the best, because if they were, then they wouldn't have been overthrown by communists in the 1980s. But it's, who are you going to choose? The people who are already here, who know your language, who know your customs, who, in many ways respect your personhood, even if it is an exploitative feudal system, or somebody who's going to come in here and just throw everything upside down.
Yeah.
And do God knows what to God knows who.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful story of resistance and of unity. And I think that in any movement that we want to have as people going on in the future, that taking that idea of bringing all of us together for a common goal is essentially what we need. So maybe if we get invaded by aliens, we'll we'll all team up.
You saw Independence Day. We got it together, and following Will Smith, we got it together. We
had our own Menelik.
Yeah. It was Will Smith and Bill Pullman.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, I don't know if you guys saw the second Independence Day movie, but they had that one scene with that one Congolese dude who had the machetes and he was like fighting the aliens. I want that movie.
Yeah.
I want to know what he was doing in the
Yeah,
20 years since the
yeah.
aliens invaded in the Congo with his dual machetes fighting these aliens in
That man
Amazon.
did work. Yes,
I feel
yes.
like that would
Seasoned
who,
work.
whoever owns the rights to Independence Day, please make this movie and put me in it.
I hear that.
But that was but that's the Battle of Adwa. I think that we covered a lot today. We talked about the
Yeah,
origins of the original treaty, the Berlin Conference, the conflicts that happened leading up to it. We had a great conversation about the arms and armor and any of that. So as we come close to sort of tying up our live stream here, what are some things that you think people should consider when studying Ethiopian history or studying African history, looking at the Battle of Adwa, or just generally sources that they can use to help them learn a little bit more? And also, of course, shamelessly plug whatever project you're working on.
Well, one thing I will say when it comes down to any reading up on any type of history, as much as we were doing it here, don't fanboy. History is very gray and it's very gruesome. There is a little bit more debate on good and bad guys, and especially when it comes down to sovereignties fighting against each other. Um, and it's one of those things where, as you're analyzing history, you got to be very mindful of that. For a lot of people from the mainland and the diaspora, we resonate with the story because it's just like finally, like you have a country that stands up against these European powers. But at the same time, you have to think about like the context of like the war with the princes, the unification, what it took to unify Ethiopia, the outcomes that happened afterwards, and so on and so forth. Just with any other conflict, you always want to be very mindful of kind of like romanticizing it. That's the academic term. Do romanticizing these historical events. You learn the lessons, you pick up on the stuff, but like at the same time, just be very careful of fandom. I don't know a lot of sources. I'm very young, and I'm very new, not new to this because we've been talking about this for years. But it's actually about to be 8 years. 8 years since we've been with HAMAA.
Yeah, 8 years since you've been working with HAMAA. Yeah.
Every March, we always talking about Ottawa Victory Day. So I don't have like any like sources that kind of like help with like your further knowledge more so than these two guys or these two gentlemen over here. And I would leave that to you guys.
Source wise, there's a lot of firsthand accounts. They were both literate societies, so they both wrote their own accounts of the battle. So you might have to dig into some libraries, and bring out some old books. I believe so. There's a book, and I bought it a while ago, but I have not had a chance to really get into it. I want to say it's called Prevail, and I think they use a lot of firsthand Ethiopian accounts. I can't think of who wrote it, so I don't want to say it was written by an Ethiopian, but I know that they use a lot of firsthand accounts and documentations in that book, referencing the different the first and second Italian Ethiopian war. I do want to say one thing real quick, that during the second war, I found out that there was a drive for Black Americans to fight in that war, and we signed up in the thousands to go fight. But the United States, to the point where we had boats, the boats were ready and people were getting on the boats. The United States government blockaded the boats and did not let them leave the country to fight for Ethiopia, which is just crazy to me. I do believe that 2 Americans were able to fight. One was a pilot who was already in the European conflict at the time, and somehow he was able to get over to Ethiopia, and he helped start the Ethiopian Air Force. So it was a Black American that helped train the first Ethiopian pilots.
Yeah, I do remember that because Ethiopia was just starting its new Air Force. And I think they had a few biplanes that
Yeah,
they had outfitted from the First World War, but they were looking to I mean, Emperor Haile Selassie was looking to purchase some newer, more modern planes for his military.
yeah.
So we could only imagine what would have happened if he had been given another 5 years to get that up and running.
Only imagine what would happen if the Black Americans were able to get over there. That would have changed. That would have changed the Black American Ethiopian relationship for sure.
Do we know that that pilot was like Tuskegee? Was it
I
Tuskegee?
don't think he was, no.
I'm
I
not
don't think he was
sure.
part of the Tuskegee. But I do know the story of that pilot, and I know that he did train some of the Ethiopian fighter pilots before the Air Force was defeated. But I would argue it's less a question of the quality of the Air Force and more a question of just the tools they had available.
Yeah,
get
exactly.
them. I mean, if you got a slow moving biplane, you're not really going to do much against like a.
Someone commented the name John C. Calhoun. Was that his name?
You know what? Let me check.
It predates the Tuskegee program. So he was not that's what the commenter Iman Manifisto commented from YouTube.
Actually, it was, let's see here. It was John Charles Robinson. He was an American aviator and activist who was hailed as the Brown Condor, was his name. They called him Brown Condor for his service in the Ethiopian Imperial Air Force against India.
And that predates the Tuskegee program.
Yeah, it predates the Tuskegee program. He was in Ethiopia prior to the Tuskegee program getting kicked off.
I wonder where he got his training.
Well, if you think about it, there were Black pilots around that time.
Just not this Tuskegee. You're right, because the Tuskegee program was started by a Black pilot. So.
Right. Because even like in World War I, for example, the world's first Black fighter pilot was actually in the Ottoman Empire. What was his name? I'll tell you for a second.
I've seen the brother with the big beard. Yeah, big beard. I've seen that one. Thick leather jacket, big beard. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Ahmed Ali Effendi, also known as Ahmed Ali Selikten. So he was you can actually see his photo. He's chilling by his plane.
Yeah.
All swaggered out.
Yeah.
You know. It's too bad he was on the other side of that war. But yeah, he was the first Black fighter pilot. So there were Black fighter pilots at the time, but yeah, they were definitely there.
Yeah.
So they're out there.
Yes.
And to the credit of the African American community wanting to fight for Ethiopia, I'm fairly certain that bringing the additional resources and manpower wouldn't have changed the outcome of the occupation, but would have definitely provided more resources for them to be able to continue an effective resistance until they were able to get the material support they needed. Because again, I don't think the question of Ethiopia being defeated was a question of the quality of their army or a question of the numbers that they had, but just technology and resources and international alliances. Had they not been left out to dry, they probably would have sent the Italians packing again on day one.
Yeah.
So that pretty much concludes our discussion on the Battle of Adwa. Osa, Sam, thank you very much for coming through. I hope you all learned a lot from what we talked about today. If you take a look at the comment history, we made sure to share some links so that you can read the Treaty of Wuchale for yourself. You can also take a look at the Arms and Armor from one of Osprey's books that were published, and some other articles that might give you a bit more background as to what led up to the Battle of Adwa, what happened during that battle, and what the outcome was. So from the Historical African Martial Arts Association, we say thank you. We ask you to stay tuned for more of our projects. We are continuing to work on the Mamluk project. We finished our first draft recently, and we are still working on the edits. We are also looking into getting more on the 28 weapons from the Congo, from Central Africa. Sam and Osa are working really hard on that, and we'll continue to do our best to bring you the highest quality of education, resources, and knowledge in African martial arts and military history. Before we go, we have one last question. Imani Manifesto is asking about the blade that you have. Osa, can you show it to him again?
The Gile.
And if he wanted to get one of those, where would he find it?
Well, this blade is actually very common. You can find them online. This is actually a training one that I made. It's not a live blade. Pretty thin aluminum. But I mean, you can go on, yeah, Gile. You can go on, I don't want to say not marketplace, but you can go on like eBay. They're quite, that blade is quite prevalent. You can find it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Osa. Thank you, Sam. And please take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.